Welcome. Can you hear me? Yes. Welcome to the final roundtable of this marvelous symposium. Thank you so much. Errol just arrived, so thank you, Errol, for making it. And thank you to all the other guests who came from Switzerland, Belgium, and Switzerland. So thank you so much for being here. I'm just going to, remind you to turn off your phones or at least put them on silent mode. Say hi to our listeners on Instagram Live. So we're live on Instagram. And we'll also be on our YouTube channel. So our talk will be, you'll be there forever. So just no pressure. Anyway, so this is Drawing Ecosystems. We're very happy to welcome Carole Haensler, who is the director of Museo Villa dei Cedri in Bellinzona, and also the president of the Swiss Association of Museums. Monica Jager, who's an artist and also a professor, and you'll tell us more about it. Gabriela Albergaria, who's a Portuguese artist living in between Brussels and Lisbon. And Errol Reuben Fernandes, which you're forcing me to not do a Portuguese accent, which is very hard, who is kind of the wild card in the talk. You work at the Horniman Museum as a specialist gardener, but you're also an artist. And so this is the beginning of our talk, Drawing Ecosystems. Thank you ever so much for being here. And I'll give the platform to you, Carole.
Thank you. Welcome to all of you. We will start with questions to all of them to introduce you and involve you, engage you in their practice, so you will right away understand why we are here and why we invited them for the talk. The idea is to reflect on the relationship between art and science, concretely drawing and botanics and horticulture. We'll start with Gabriela, because Gabriela, her practice is really starting always with drawing. A starting point is always drawing. And how this became the starting point is also linked to a specific experience. You went to Amazonia with a scientific expedition. What is interesting in the scientific expedition, the group of scientists needed other profile to communicate their work. So they invited a video maker, a photographer, and an artist. Not with a scope, a precise role in the group, just communication. Gabriela, can you tell us more about this experience and how it also defined your practice afterwards?
Yeah. So I originally am a drawer. I draw a lot. It's my main medium. And with this invitation was very important for the development and the way I saw art and drawing and all the continuation of my work. So this group of scientists, it's a group from Brazil, from the USP, the University of São Paulo, and from the American Museum of Natural History. So they have this group, and they are trying to explain biological diversity in the tropical rainforest. For that, for the first time, they joined together a group of different scientists, because in science, usually one biologist makes one study, one zoologist makes another study, and they never cross their knowledge. It's very difficult for them to cross their knowledge. So they invented this thing that they call geogenomics. And it is in this frame that I was invited, me and the photographer and the filmmaker. So they needed somehow someone to help spread a little bit their word, and to somehow there are lots of different elements here, but the main one was really to a communication thing. Communication. How can they communicate the importance of their study in different kinds of mediums and people, somehow to reach more people. Also because for scientists, it's difficult sometimes to get funds, and they feel that their language is so encrypted that they need to work with other people from other fields. So this was the main thing. Of course, for me, it was amazing. I said immediately yes, but I never thought that I would be in such rough conditions at a certain point, because you go from your comfort zone to other areas where the weather is terrible, where it's always mosquitoes, where it's always very hot, where you cannot sleep, where you have to get up at 4 in the morning, go out. We had a boat, a big boat. Everything was fine, but then we had these smaller boats where we had to go and spend the whole day outside, and it is rough. It is somehow rough, and me as an artist, I had to adapt. So the way as an artist, what I did was to try to learn different methodologies. So I was trying to learn what they were doing every day. So they were recollecting plants, they were bringing them to the boat, they were classifying them, but at the same time I realized that they transformed the second level of the boat in a laboratorium, and the shape of the plants disappeared totally because they needed to recover the DNA, and then they don't need the shape anymore. They don't need the color. They don't need anything like that. So I was trying to see how with my work of drawing, what could I do? Also, I had another problem. All my electronic devices were not working at all because of the humidity. So all these things, you have to adapt to this kind. It's not the first time that I was in conditions like this, so I knew already. So I took with me sketchbooks, pencils, some more basic drawing materials that are not so dependent on weather or whatever. And I started doing some. First, it was very timid what I did in the beginning, but then I started realizing that the importance for me was really to get into their methodology and what could I add to what they had. So I realized also, for instance, that the plants, as soon you pick them up, 2 hours later, they lose their color, they lose a little bit the shape, because the process, the weather is so strong, and they rotten very easily. So so all these conditions made me start doing some documentation. So I started documenting all the plants that they needed to study. In a way, a little bit like 18th century travelers. I remember that was in the back of my mind Humboldt, the first time he went to Colombia. He was very frustrated because he was gathering all these plants and they were rotting in the boxes. So he could bring the dry shape, but he couldn't have access to anything else, no more information. So he had to draw in his books, in his sketchbooks, everything. And then that's exactly what I did. That's the same thing. I learned with the scientists how to preserve the seeds, for instance. I tried to keep up the color. I tried to explain the texture. I tried to explain the smell. I tried all these other things that I could do, and they were not so interested in that, you know. But with this material, then I came to the studio, and since then I've been working a lot in different works. So the first work I did was a kind of collage art. So how do you identify one place? You identify with shapes, with colors, with, I don't know, smells, with whatever. And then I just decided it would be a color. So it's a color. This work has 2.24 meters high, and it's made of small stripes with the colors of the exact colors of the plants that I collected from this strip. So, and then I had authorization to bring all the seeds with me because we were working in an area that was protected, so we needed all the authorizations from IBRAM. And then I just, this is also a system, the one before, the photo before, it's a system that they use for the seeds not to open. So this is also something I learned with them. I didn't know anything at all. So, and then I made, already in São Paulo, I made some molds of it. And then we started working in porcelain. I wanted to somehow have this kind of delicate seeds transformed in objects, but objects that were somehow more precious. So, but then after that, I've been working a lot in different projects related with this, but it was very important. You can go on. So this is one of the pieces that I did with the porcelain. And then there was also one moment that in the boat that was very important for me. It made a big difference. So there was the scientists working on their things, but there was also the team that made everything work. So there was someone cooking, there was someone driving, there was a group of people, and I felt, because I speak Portuguese, so I could speak with them easily, and I learned how to do açaí, for instance. We collected the grains or the fruits. And this is all of an experience that was very, very strong, because we're talking about places that no one usually goes. So for me, it was very important. And learn how to do, how difficult it is to have açaí. We have it in a pot, but it is so difficult to make it. It is so extremely difficult. It takes hours to make it. And this was kind of something that I respect a lot. And then I just have the last photo. It is me driving the boat, because they told me also that to drive the boat, they need to know the big trees. So this was in the Black River. And so we did the Black River and the White River. The Black River has these very long, very tall trees, and they use it as marks to travel. Because we travel during the high tide. And the high tide is really very, very high. It covers trees. So you have areas of the forest that are under the water, but the boat can really stuck there. So you really need to know there's that big tree, and then you have to go left, and then that one. And then I wanted to learn how to do this, because it was important to, I don't know, it was part of the experience. So, and then I also had another person there that was very important for me. He is the one that was climbing the trees to pick up the plants that were more high. And he worked in Manaus for different medical laboratories. He is the one that knows and recognizes the plants to make medicine. And I don't know, he was an amazing person also. So all this made me... I don't know, to connect the drawing with this, first was this, nothing worked, and then the drawing came as, I don't know, it's a way of thinking. For me, it was really a way of thinking and writing, and so this, I don't know how to put it more, but...
Yeah, you also said that in a way you learned from their methodologies, but you also realized that your practice added something to their documentation, because, yeah, the history means for botanical documentation was also before photography. Now they have photography or film, but it was still not enough to add something to their work too.
Yeah, it's exactly, that's the point. They have the photography, they have the films, but then there's something else. And I think there's a level. One is a level of fiction and reality somehow. You know, that is another level of, but it's the fiction and reality that the drawing can have in this field or in this complement. It's important. And also there's another thing that I think it's important. It's the enchantment. The scientists, they were saying, okay, we like all this, we like all the photographies, we like all the studies, but we need the enchantment of the drawing when we do this, when we need some level, another level of communication. And I think that drawing and art can bring something else for our language. And this was something that triggered something in my head also, which was, okay, I can do something that they need, and I can somehow, good or bad, I can help this project. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Gabriela. Monica too is, in this case, not only an artist, but also starting to be a real researcher at the University of Applied Sciences in Zurich, at the Institute of Natural Resources. So your practice was an intruder at the beginning in the practice, but you also worked with different projects, expeditions, scientific expeditions, and lately you also left a bit part of the drawing to go in new technologies. Probably you didn't have the problems that Gabriela had, that she couldn't use the technology. So can you tell us also about your experiment with scientific and interactions and how you integrate that in your work as an artist?
Thank you very much. And thanks for the invitation to show a few slides here. I thought I present some older work to give you a bit of a context of where my practice comes from and still is rooted and embedded. These are ink drawings on paper, some of them quite large scale. They are forms of accumulations of compositions, of amalgams, of places I visit, of landscapes I've seen, of remnants of architectural icons, or just various types of built structures and natural habitats. And with drawing, I sort of dig myself through all these layers, or you could even say through these geological strata of cultural and natural layers. And at some point, I left the paper and started to work more in the space, as we can see here in this exhibition, working with mirror installations, with the idea of somehow folding the outside world, in this case it was a garden, folding it into the drawing by using reflection mirrors. And it was an attempt to find a different layer of not only use drawings as forms of representation, but creating drawing installations that embrace architecture, landscape, and plants, trees, or in this case, a garden. And I think the next slide gives you a bit of an idea as well. So you can imagine if you walk through the room, the drawing starts to animate itself, because as you walk, as you move, the landscape sort of unfolds constantly and takes different shapes. And this was an important moment, because I realized that there are ways to include the environment as almost collaborator into my drawings. And in one occasion in a park, I did an installation that is a bit like a three-dimensional drawing. It was very much inspired by Buckminster Fuller's geodesic dome, or tensegrities in that case. And what you can see here is only half a sphere, executed with wood and cables, but then the landscape does the other part of the sphere. So the landscape itself, the reflection of the water, becomes a a material that complements the work itself. And I thought this is interesting to the point where I went even further to think about ways of working with natural elements, plant elements, beyond representation, but much more through material. And I started to extract or find people who can extract chlorophyll from plants and use this pigment as a as a drawing medium. And as you can imagine, like a leaf that you took from from the Amazon, this fades as well. It's not a light stable pigment, and it was quite an interesting experiment because the drawing changes. I also thought, okay, no one ever will buy this because it's not archival. Maybe a private collector, but definitely not a public collection. But interestingly, this fact exactly that this drawing has a life on its own made it actually quite interesting for collections. And then this chlorophyll sort of entered also my video work at some point. I changed the medium, but the way of working with the subject matter was still the same. So as much as the drawings on paper were ways of accessing the world, understanding the world, and metabolize the world, still the video installations do the same. And Carole said before that I do work as an artist in a natural science university. And I did that because I thought it's really important to know where the knowledge that we all learn at school comes from, how it is produced, and what people produce it, and what are the conditions this is produced. So I went to this institute and told them quite boldly, I was 25 or something, said, well, you know, if you want to be a proper university, you need an artist on your campus. And I was lucky enough, they said, yes, okay. And for quite some years, they didn't quite know what to do with me. But over the years, we found modes of working together and integrate my artistic practice into their research. And what we see here is a research garden on soil ecology. And I guess it's because an artist is working in that group. It's not just a soil profile you would usually have that students study and researchers investigate, but it has become what we call a narrative environment, an earthwork, including a drawing where people can enter a soil system and smell it and hear it and feel it in a different way. And to conclude, we even sort of started to use this conceptual work as a way of communicating through plant communities. In this case, at the Villa dei Cedri, we created this flower bed to tell the stories of the migration of plants, and I think that sort of closes the circle quite beautifully to what you were telling us about your journey.
Thank you, Monica.
Oh, I had more, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I had... what comes out of what we heard now, it's that drawing is a way of integrate nature in the praxis, it's an observation process, but it's also getting deeper in what we observe. It's observation, but it's also introduce emotions in the message to communicate. And there is a dimension that was interesting also. You mentioned the importance of the team and what you heard from the team, and this links to communities. And all these elements are the reason why Errol is here on stage with us. Errol actually started as an artist. He really formed himself as an artist. Then at Goldsmiths went on with art therapy. And at a certain point, he also curated exhibition. He worked for big institutions in London, and at a certain point, decided to go and training on botanics and horticulture. And today, he's the chief gardener at Horniman Museums and Gardens. And what was interesting in preparing this this talk was that you said that what you're doing now, it's not really different from what you were doing as an artist. You don't have the impression that it changed. It's always about landscape. You were working about landscape, regeneration of landscape also as an artist, and now you do it in the gardening. Can you tell us about your world of landscape?
Yeah, so I think that for me, I'm very fortunate that I feel like I've come full circle in my career, really, and I've been very lucky to experience that. So as a child, I had a very special place that I called the Wasteland. It's a brownfield site, so it would have been built on at some point, and nature has sort of claimed it back. And sites like this are extremely valuable to wildlife because the structure that remains, the skeletal structure of the buildings, of the objects that we leave behind become a very important shelter and home for biodiversity, plants and also other wildlife, invertebrates and mammals. And this place became my playground, essentially. And I learnt later that it was a Victorian dump. And I began an exploration quite naively as a child to collect these objects and keep them and try and categorize them. And then later, when I studied fine art painting, I also started to document that landscape, really in a bid to preserve it somehow. So I would go and draw in the landscape, I would take objects from the landscape, make sculpture, sometimes even use the soil itself. And it was all quite frantic in a bid to preserve this place and keep hold of a memory of it, because I always feared that it would be built on. I always feared that in London, this was such a valuable piece of land that we were going to lose it. So essentially, this dance with the landscape became, I suppose, quite a profound relationship developed. And I'm hoping this year to do a piece of film, work with a documentary filmmaker to create a video about this place. And essentially, when I've been discussing the brief, and I was just discussing it yesterday actually, she was saying, but what is this piece of film going to be? And the only way that I could describe it is as sort of a love story. And I think that was a discovery for me, that actually you can have such a deep connection, not just with people or animals or, with the environment itself. And that connection still remains with me as a thread in the work that I do now. I went on to study fine art, and this place continued with me there. I then studied psychotherapy. And again, this place stayed with me there through that work, and my psychotherapy angle became land-based, inviting people to connect and experience sort of landscapes. And then, like I said, full circle, I'm now working as the head of horticulture at the Horniman Museum. A large part of our remit is working with communities, working with our local community. We have 16.5 acres of gardens, and they're quite intensively cultivated. But we only have really sort of 6 staff. And so we have 50 volunteers that attend each week, and these volunteers are committed, sort of part of the workforce essentially, but they're local residents, and they each come for their own reason. So some of them might come for horticultural knowledge and education, some of them might come because they want to interact with other people within the environment, within their local community, and some of them might come because they want some sort of exercise or they don't have a garden of their own. So that community becomes really important. The images that you're seeing now as well, I think the wonderful thing about the Horniman is that they're quite an experimental organization. So there's no historic management plan that often governs gardens. So with a historic management plan, you'd always be going back to a single point in time and considering the planting at that point. And that has frustrated me in the past when I've worked for historic gardens with management plans, because if a plant, particularly in relation to climate change, so if we consider how fast climate has already changed and how it's predicted to change, we can't keep growing the same types of species because they're not going to cope, and they're already not coping in our South London garden. So we want to be able to forecast for the future, to not ignore the species that we're growing now, but to predict and to experiment and to explore what might work in the future. Part of that work has now sort of led us into working with waste aggregates, again, to lower our carbon footprint, and to consider climate change, but also because we can push the limit of what we can grow when we experiment with the aggregates. So here we've got a Puntia cacti from Mexico. There was a slide with a big heap of waste material. Where's that slide? And back again, I think. Yes, this. So this heap of aggregates was quite interesting because we had tons and tons of this sort of waste material at the museum last winter when we were doing a major pathway redevelopment, and normally this material would just be sent to landfill, and rather than send it to landfill, we wanted to utilize it at the museum to reduce our carbon footprint, but also because it's a really exciting medium to be exploring. So a lot of those plant species that we were looking at, so we heaped it on the ground. There was almost 15 tons of it that we retained, and then we planted directly into it. And what that enabled us to do is to grow species that would otherwise be potentially a little bit sensitive to our climate and overwinter them outside. And it's the free-draining nature of that substrate that allows us to do that. So a lot of the species that we might grow, like that Puntia cacti, for example, it can cope with -20, but it can't cope with -20 and wet through the winter. So by having a really free-draining substrate, we can get it through a winter because it's much more akin to where it would come from naturally. But exploring aggregates sort of feels like, I suppose when I was invited to speak, I too asked the question, why on earth have you asked me to come and speak? However, I started to really challenge myself and go back to my profession of that preservation of that landscape, and also the fact that I work for a museum, and the museum's collection is natural history and anthropology, and there is something about collecting that draws, I feel, connects me as an artist and myself as a gardener, because I'm still here trying to collect and keep and preserve. And back then I was doing the same. There's something about preservation and also this drawing out. When we consider the word draw, or when I consider the word draw, it's not just about a line across a page. It's about an extraction from the soil, and in many ways, I suppose that's how I consider, that becomes the language of what I do as a horticulturalist, because I'm essentially, as a horticulturalist, I'm observing the plants, and the plants are drawing from the soil, and I'm observing, we are observing as horticulturalists what the plants show us of what's beneath the surface. So in their growth habits, in the coloration of their leaves, one plant grown on a slightly different soil would either survive or die, for example. And so that's one of the reasons why I put those slides in. What other slides have you got up? Oh, meadows, yes. I mean, so our meadows at the Horniman, so this is relatively new, and this meadow might look quite well established, but it's actually only a few years old. And when I arrived at the Horniman, again, I suppose we're wanting to show the identity of this landscape. We're wanting to, historically, horticulture has been about taming the land, about refining, about placing our stamp on it. And the movement of horticulture has completely changed, as has so much else. We're really thinking about sustainability, we're thinking about working with nature, we're thinking about plant communities, and so we're trying to be more hands-off, because as green as gardening may sound, every time we intervene we cause damage and destruction. So to stop the mowing and to allow the seed banks that are deep within the soil to reveal what's there, to allow the structures and the microorganisms and the mycelium networks that are within the soil to heal and to reveal what is there, seems like a really beautiful thing. And there's an authenticity and an honestness about it. So what we've begun to do is to mow less. We do, in a sense, carve these pathways through the meadows. So I think just out of shot, you can just sort of see a line. So because a lot of the work that we're doing is about people too. It's not just about wildlife and biodiversity. We sit 16.5 acres in South London, so it's a really built-up, busy area. And this is a gift, really, to that community. But it's more than a gift. It's a point at which people can connect, and so many of us are not fortunate enough to have gardens of our own. The least we can do is provide good green space and the opportunity for people to connect. But if it's a manicured lawn, it's all too often devoid of biodiversity, devoid of wildlife, so to speak. So by reducing the amount that we're cutting, we're essentially creating an opportunity for the grass to brush up against someone's cheek when they're sat having a picnic, for the nature to be buzzing around their heads. And that I do believe it's about creating opportunities for relationship to develop. Because going back to what I was saying about my wasteland as a child, if I didn't have that connection, then I wouldn't have relationship. And if I didn't have relationship, then I wouldn't care. And so we at every point are trying to create opportunity for connection.
Thank you. Actually, the aggregates, the plants are your composition now, like the materiality. And that is something that is interesting. Now you are getting in this natural world. We went through the chlorophyll with Monica, but also Gabriela actually is a more perhaps classical, was thinking classical drawing artist. And actually in the development of your work, you get more and more to integrate also also elements from nature, and not only does Errol in the gardens recycle what he has on site, you recycle, in a way, the thinking of what you use and the future of it to be reintegrated potentially in nature after the end of the life of the artwork is also something very important. So
yes, I've been
way around.
Yeah, I've been developing some works about the almost inexistent, or the things that we don't pay too much attention. So small sticks that are rotting on the floor, the soil that can build something out of it, or the way we walk in under some trees and we can stomp in their roots, and what this can mean in our way of dealing with that space. Interesting, because this last work that I did with in Villa de Cedri, it's just a line of rotten sticks that I recovered with a kind of material that is not clay, but is a material that is used in another. It's used to recover molds from bronze, the bronze technique, but it is in fact a material that also disappears. So I wanted to kind of have an attention with care with this rotten small sticks, but we never keep it as a sculpture forever. So this is the process of all the works that I do now. They are, in this sense, they will disappear. So it's also the same problem. We have always the same problem with collectors. Only the drawings, but the drawings, it's the same thing. Paper is always burning, it will disappear. So this is very interesting, because I like a lot the complete cycle of the nature. You know, I'm always interested in this thing when visiting gardens in the winter is amazing, you know, or I don't know, those kind of attention to the world in a different way, you know, now that we talk about this.
And actually, this is also bringing us to the question of time. Is this something that we also really discuss and that is totally integrated? In a way also, Errol, in what you were saying, because in planting you have also to give the time to the plants and to grow. It's also about, it's a creative place anyway, but it's also a notion that we have in the sustainability and will all the works live forever? And it's also a question of how we deal with time in our work. Monica is actually the topic of some of your.
I think it's time sits at the center of all this what we were speaking now, and I thought it was quite interesting when you were talking about old ways of designing gardens, you know, where it was all about composition and shape, and they were gardens created on a drawing board and then executed like a drawing. And you said that in horticulture, you know, there is a huge shift of collaborating with the plants and let them create a community and working with time and allowing time to do the work. And I think instead of saying gardening is a bit like drawing, this thought could sort of open up a gap and a space where it allows for new concepts for drawing. I don't know if you can follow me, but and it's not quite clear yet, but the idea of drawing as gardening, or gardening as drawing, in a way that you have an idea in mind, and you prepare something that you know will unfold in the future, and at some point you give up control, and you sort of have the trust that it establishes itself as a system. And when I'm saying that, in my mind, I have the garden as a prototype for that. But I would love to think about drawing in this way as well. So, yeah, I don't know if you can relate to that.
Yeah, no, I that completely resonates. I mean, that is essentially how we work, my team. So essentially, we're making interventions. So interventions in the landscape based on a hypothesis, and then essentially kick-starting something. So I don't know if we've got any images of the microforest, but this microforest. So this is quite interesting because this is essentially that. So microforests were developed by a gentleman called Akira Miyawaki in the 1950s. He sadly died, I think, 3 years ago. But what he did is he observed naturalized forests, so not man-made, sort of self-seeded forests in nature. And he observed that the trees would grow very, very close, essentially where the seed falls. And the seed would be triggered into growth when a large tree in that area fell and created light and allowed moisture in. And I suppose would stop taking up all the nutrients, so that those seeds that sit within the soil can start growing. But the proximity could be, inches away from one another. So Miyawaki noted that actually these forests would race for light and grow at an exceedingly fast rate, much faster than an artificially spaced sort of tree planting that we might sort of create. The trees would never grow to a huge statuesque kind of height that we see in our parks and gardens. They'd sort of cap off at maybe 6-7 meters maybe. But the planting would be extremely dense and could create a closed canopy in a short space of time. So what we've essentially done here is we've considered the potential natural vegetation of the area, so what might grow naturally. We've also considered climate change, so we feathered in species from further afield, North America, Northern Europe, Southern Europe, and various other Mediterranean climatic zones. We've put these trees, they had to be planted at pencil thickness, pencil height, so very small young trees. This is now sort of 2 years on, that image. This was when they'd just gone in. And essentially we're kick-starting something. We don't know how it's going to develop. And this is also a really hands-off intervention. So we've made an intervention, there's a hypothesis based on the species, and we've put them in the ground, and now we're going to see how they respond to the nutrients, to the light, to the water, to the other minerals that are in the soil, and then they will show us what's beneath the surface.
It's amazing. The Miyawaki forest, I saw already one in Brussels, and they are doing one in Touré-Taxi, which is an area that was really turned down, and they are building one, and it's amazing the way how fast it grows, but also how it recovers the soil. It's mainly he used it to his first. He used it to first recover the soil of the university grounds, wasn't it? I think I read something about that, to recover all the soil, and because it was stepped by the foot of people, and nothing would grow there. And this system helps to recover mainly urban spaces, which is amazing, very good, yeah.
Because we've crammed in 900 trees in 400 square meters. So it's a huge amount of trees and 35 different species. So, but really, I suppose how I'm connecting this to what you're saying really is that we're not holding control. We've made an intervention, and now we stand away, and we see and we observe and we learn. So it's kind of working with nature rather than kind of dominating. It's more of a collaboration rather than taking the lead.
What you all said also about time and experimenting. Sorry if I consider you as seeds, but it's why I experiment in curating, because in curating you have an idea, you have a topic, you have artists where you see, okay, they are getting in that direction, how they can bring something to this topic, they can bring the message, and then you contact them and you discuss with them what kind of project do you want to make here. I want you for this and these reasons. I'm interested in that and that of the part of your work. And you construct with them. And at the end, most of it, when it's a collective exhibition, you are there. Will they work together? So it's growing step by step, and all the gardens are opening. And then in the end, does it function, does it not, or create new interactions that you didn't even think about it. So also this, that's why also probably as a curator, I oriented myself in these questions of botanics, because I consider really my work as organic and growing each time with the discussions and well, the classical thing is that when you open an exhibition, you have already in mind that you should have done it in a total different way, and you are ready for the next one. But it's also time for you to have questions, intervene. We are here for you.
Are there any questions?
Yeah.
It can be in French, and I can translate.
Thank you. I had a question, which is, I would say, maybe a comment as well. I believe that what we can see here is that what characterizes also nature, ecosystems, and so on, is the extreme complexity of shapes in the nature, and more than that, different levels of complexity interconnected with each other, and so on. So my comment is that I was a little bit disappointing that in the wonderful exhibition that we have today, dedicated to contemporary drawing, it seems that no place is made to computer drawing, although computers is a wonderful tool to explore complexity. And when I say that, I'm not having in mind using a Photoshop or so on, of course. I have in mind algorithmic art, which is a way for artists to generate algorithm to generate complexity. A very well-known example is fractal algorithms, because the shapes in nature, you can see, of course, in the landscape or in the botanic, there are fractals, but not only fractals. I would speak of multifractal, in fact, because fractal, the same shape repeats itself at different scales, but in reality, you have different shapes at different scales, and this is really, this complexity it is logical to explore it with computer drawing. So why do not we mention here computer drawing? This was my question.
So now on to that.
Actually, for the invite, I was really focusing on botanics and the basics, material of botanics. The next step is ecosystems, and here we would have a totally different table around us, also with mycologists. But Monica, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just very brief. I think that's quite interesting, because when you're what you just said reminded me of, is your gardening intervention, could that be a prompt, like a ChatGPT or an AI prompt? So you give something in and then you let the system go. So yeah, so I guess it's not that far from each other, right?
I mean, that's blown my brain, because that could be really interesting. So I'm doing a ChatGPT kind of inspired sort of garden. That would be really, really cool.
Let's do that.
We should do that. Definitely, 100%. Let's do that. But what you've just spoken about has just reminded me of our Zoom call ahead of this, where we talked about pattern and sort of almost like graphic-like pattern in nature. So if we consider plant species, I don't know if the pulmonaria made it into the cut, did it? But if you consider, so it's a spotted leaf plant, but if we consider the patternation within botanics, that's absolutely fascinating, and how this patternation occurs really is through natural selection. So essentially they're trying to avoid being eaten, and slowly over time the ones with the dappled, the mottled sort of leaf have essentially camouflaged in dappled light that's cast through the forest sort of foliage, and they've made it because they've been kind of hidden essentially. So yeah, patternation within nature is quite interesting in terms of drawing.
Yeah, I guess drawing saved this one's life. So, but I now remember why I had this other image there. You know, that was at the very end there. We saw, because I remember I had this question for you, and I would like to repeat it. You know, does nature draw? And or do plants draw? And what we see here is a life strategy of microbial life in a post-glacier landscape. And these little lines here, these super fine lines, are actually or probably microalgae or bacteria hanging on to each other to make sure they can extract as much nutrients from this very sort of sparse water ecosystem. So in this case as well, you know, drawing a line or creating a line for these microorganisms is actually a way of surviving or living.
Are there any? Yeah, this was a question that contained so many questions. Thank you.
Yes, it's actually,
we have time for one or two more.
Is defining the next topic of the next symposium about what is drawing today.
Thank you for your talk. I have a question about your relationship with the researcher. You say you have been working with university and museums. And I wonder if sometimes you invite researchers to take part to the art piece or the artwork, or do you think the collaboration between art and science modify the way they research? Or because I used to be an artist on scientific exhibition, and sometimes I felt like it's quite hard to connect between science and art. Some people are really interested, and some they say, "Oh, it's beautiful," and that's it. And so, what is your feedback or feeling about this?
Yeah, I think the status is complicated. The relationship between artists and scientists, but it's a nice form of complication. In a bad situation, artists just visualize scientific ideas, and in another bad situation or a bad relationship, artists just mine scientists for data knowledge. In an ideal relationship, you have a common question, and you start from there. And you start research and sort of develop your questions through this collaboration. And this is hardly the case because of the institutional settings we have, of the way these projects are financed. And it's a structural problem. Also because scientists have totally different agenda when it comes to output. They need to produce papers and publish papers, and usually art, comes in not so handy in this. So that's why I advocate tandems or collaborations between artists and scientists that are embedded in the institutions, because otherwise it will, as you might have experienced, always be slightly unsatisfying.
Yes, exactly. Experiences with residencies in scientific laboratories often is the reply. We had this with an example we had recently, where the artist was starting to discover about bees, and it was really a laboratory on that. And then she saw interconnections and wanted to go in another direction. But this laboratory was working only on one aspect, so she wasn't able to go in that direction. So in the end, she interrupted the residency because for the laboratory is not. She had to stay in the way they are working. So it's more about also sometimes intersections. That's what also art brings, or this dimension when both can experiment in that way, in their way. That is what is important. But I had the same experience when working on an exhibition called Botanical Icons, when I said, okay, it will be easy to find the terrain for discussion because it's just the classical herbarium, it's what it was drawing at the beginning, and they are collecting. It's quite easy. I think I can understand the methodology, so the scope is that we can discuss together. She can explain me the way she was working, collecting, and also to understand if this methodology could also be something for me as a curator to integrate in my practice. And the problem, actually, each time she came to the garden, she was not calling me, and I just if I saw her by chance, I was saying, hey, hello, but she had already collected everything. It was already all packed in her luggage, and I just had the result. But what's worth interesting for me, it's not the result, it's the methodology. But on the other side, it's also a question, you said, from input, from output, and the question is also of time, because sometimes they don't have the time to share their methodology because it's too slow in the process for getting to the output. And that's why sometimes this connection doesn't function. Or you get a special financial project where the scientist and the artist are creating a group and they are financed for their time on this project, or they are embedded in a structure, in an institution.
Speaking of time, I think we're headed towards the end of this talk. Thank you ever so much. It was such an honor to have you here. Unless there's one very simple question. Oh, there is. Okay, just one. And quick answers, please. And then we'll wrap it up.
Thank you very much. Also, thank you very much for the very interesting talk. My question is really short. So I would like to ask you, what do you think? Is contemporary drawing defined by not working alone? Because you said so, you always emphasized on discussing with people, working together. Would you then say this is it?
I mean, it strikes me that perhaps it's you're never really working in isolation as an artist or when drawing, because you're drawing in response to something. So I wonder if it's always a collaboration.
Yeah, I think it's I think it's always a collaboration somehow. Even if we are alone in our studio, it's after some collaboration process, because we are not alone. So it's not. It's never. The process can be lonely. You know, the process can be lonely, but all the research, all that arrives to that moment. It's always. I think it's because we are we are surrounded by knowledge, by people, by influence. I think it's important. Then we have our different interests somehow, and but I think it's always a collaboration for me.
It's not a simple question at all. That will be my first answer, and then I tell you why. Because I think it's too too easy to say, yes, of course, it's all about collaboration. So we have to find something in between, because the question is, to whom do we give the credit to be a collaborator? Yeah, and I don't answer it, but I think that's something I constantly think about. To whom do I give the credit to be a collaborator?
But you know, for instance, in my case, some of my works, I always have the names of the people that work with me. Even the people that hang the works and helps me to choose the places and gardeners or whatever. Yeah.
But I want to go further. You know, is the cactus? Is that your collaborator? And is the brick in your garden that you're recycling, is that your collaborator?
This was not a simple question.
I think
we need to wrap up.
I mean, I'd say yes, just quickly, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you all for being here. Thank you for your questions. Thank you.